Hi, this is Terry, and on this video, we're going to talk about finding the slope of the line and then also graphing a slope of a line. So let's look at this first problem here. We have a point, -2, comma, -1, and we also have a point, -1, comma, -4. So we are wanting to find the slope of this line. So to be able to do that, we need to know what's called the slope formula. So I'm going to write it down here for us. We're going to have m equals, and we're going to say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So this is going to be our slope formula, and that m literally just means our slope. You'll just see it abbreviated m. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to look back at our 2 points that we have, and we're going to label them like we always do when we have a point, x and y, just so we don't get confused which one's which. But this time, we're going to label one set with ones, so x1, y1, and the other set with twos, x2, y2. And once we have that done, we are just going to start plugging in numbers. So we have m equals, and we start out with y2. Our y2 is a -4 minus, and then y1, and y1 is a -1, and we are going to go ahead and put that -1 in parentheses just because we don't want to lose that negative. Even though we have a minus between them, we still have a -1. All right, so let's look at the bottom. We have x2, that's a -1, minus, and what is x1? It is -2. And I'm going to just put it in parentheses to make us help us to remember. One common mistake is that if there's a negative up there, you won't put the minus sign in between, that there has to be a minus sign. Okay, so we're just going to kind of simplify this down. So we're going to see -4 and a negative and a negative. If you see two negatives or a negative and a minus right beside each other, they become a plus. So it becomes a +1. And then we have -1. We have, again, two negatives or a minus and a negative beside each other, which makes a +2. And then we're just going to go a little further, and we're going to say -4 plus 1, that makes a -3, or a -1 plus 2, that makes a 1. And here again, you could use your calculator to type that in, and you're going to get the same thing. So then we just simplify. -3 over 1 is a -3. So our slope for this problem is -3, and that's as far as we can go. We're just looking for the slope. All right, so let's look at another problem here. This time I have 2 points. I have a line, and I'm supposed to find the slope of that line. So we know that to be able to use our formula, we have to have 2 points. So let's write down what these 2 points are. So let's look at the first point up here. And if you'll notice, it is on, we do the x first, it's on the x of 0. And then it goes up to 3. So that is 0, 3. Then we look at our other point down here, and we look at the x first. It's on a 1, and it's on the y value of 0. So we have 2 points, 0, 3, and 1, 0. And it does not matter which order I put those in. I could flip-flop the order and put 1, 0, and then 0, 3. It's still the same thing, all right? So we are going to label these guys. We've got x, y, x, y. The first one will be 1s. The second one will be 2s. And again, if you had your x1s and y1s where your x2, y2s are, it would be the same thing. You're going to get the same answer either way. All right, so let's look back at our formula one more time. I'm going to write it down just so we don't forget. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, and so let's start plugging in some numbers and see what we get. So we're going to say m equals, okay, and we have y2, which is 0, minus y1, which is 3, over x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is 0. So if we continue to solve that, we say 0 minus 3 is just -3, over 1 minus 0 is 1. So the slope of this line, if you continue to simplify down, would be -3. That is our slope. So I'm going to show you one other way of looking at this slope. This was one way using our slope formula, but there's another way of looking at this too. So you may have heard somewhere before that slope equals rise over run. You may have heard that in high school somewhere. And all that's talking about is our y over our x. Okay, so what we're going to do is we want to know how far it goes from one point. So from this point, we want to know how far it is to get to this point. All right, so let's look at this. If we look and we're at this point and we want to go all the way down, how many do we go down to get to this point right here where it's out on that line? We go down 3, right? 1, 2, 3. So that's going to be that -3. That's the rise that's going down. And then from that point, how far do we go over to get to the point where our point's at? We go over 1. So that goes on the bottom of our fraction. If we simplify that, we get -3. That is the same thing that we got before. And they should be, either way you do it, it should be the same answer. So we do rise, that's the up and down, over run, that's the left or right. One thing to remember, it's also something that might be a little helpful. If you have a line that is angling down like ours is, we know this is going to be a negative slope. And if it is angling up, we know it's going to be a positive. I hope if I spelled it right. Okay, positive slope. There we go. So angled down is negative slope, angled up is positive slope. All right, so let's look at one more here. Okay, and this is going to, this time we're going to be graphing, okay? So it tells us to graph a line given the point and the slope. So we have our point and our slope, and we're going to graph this on our graph. So the first thing we want to do is label our x and y. And because we only have one, we just have to label one, x and y. So we're going to put that point over here on our graph. So this tells us that x is 2, right? So we always start at 0, 0. So we go over to the 2. And then it tells us the second point is a -1. So it tells us to go down 1. And that is where we put our point right there. It's basically where 2 on the x and -1 on the y intersect. So here's our point. All right. So from there, we're going to do what our slope says. And I'm going to rewrite our slope. It says -1 over 2. And when we're looking at a slope, the top number is always going to tell us either to go up if it's positive and down if it's negative. And the bottom number always tells us to go right. Okay, so let's look at this. Our top number, this number right here, tells us a -1. So that is our rise, and that's going to tell us to go up or down. We have a -1, so we're going to go down 1. So from that point that we had, we go down 1. That puts us at the -2, right? And then the bottom number tells us to go 2 to the right. So from there, we're going to go over 2. So there's 1, 2, and that is where we put our point. And then we connect these 2 points together, and they become our line.